Matilda Hacker was born in 1811 in Canterbury, Kent, into the family of John and Mary Hacker. Her father, John, was a skilled and prosperous stonemason, whose work contributed to the upkeep and restoration of Canterbury's medieval architecture. Her mother, Mary, maintained the household and raised the children, including Matilda, her younger sister Amelia, and two brothers. Canterbury during the early 19th century was a religious and cultural center, with modest population growth following the Napoleonic Wars and a largely craft-based economy. John Hacker's success afforded the family financial stability. The Hackers acquired multiple properties in Canterbury, including 4 terrace houses in the Blackfriars area, reflecting their growing prosperity. John personally funded the installation of a clock at St. George's Church in 1837, demonstrating his civic engagement and social standing. Matilda's upbringing was therefore comfortable, marked by relative economic security and stability within a respectable household. Her early years were shaped by domestic routines, schooling, and observation of her father's craft. While she was provided with advantages uncommon for many children of the period, particularly girls, her upbringing also reflected middle-class expectations regarding propriety and family duty. This environment established both her early social visibility and the foundation for her later independence and distinctive personality. Matilda Hacker's childhood education was modest but respectable. She and her sister Amelia attended a local dame school, where lessons included reading, writing, arithmetic, scripture, and basic needlework. Instruction for girls during this period emphasized moral education and domestic skills, rather than advanced academic training. Matilda received guidance in these areas, although formal schooling opportunities remained limited compared to those offered to boys. The sisters remained unmarried throughout their lives. In early 19th century England, marriage was often considered the expected path for women of middle-class families, and their unmarried status was noted by local residents. Despite social expectations, Matilda and Amelia continued to live with their parents and managed aspects of their household. This independent path, though unusual, was permitted by the family's financial security and reflected the family's social standing. Matilda's upbringing cultivated early self-reliance. While her education was basic, it provided sufficient literacy and numeracy to manage property and household accounts. Social expectations for middle-class women included proper comportment, religious observance, and management of domestic affairs. Matilda and Amelia adhered to these norms outwardly, while establishing a life increasingly separate from the conventions surrounding marriage and female domestic roles. These early experiences contributed to Matilda's reputation for independence and set the stage for later public attention. Her early life demonstrates the intersections of education, social expectation, and gender in 19th century Canterbury. It also foreshadows the combination of financial security, eccentric behavior, and autonomy that would mark her later years and ultimately shape the public's interest in her mysterious disappearance and unresolved death. During the years following their father's continued financial support, Matilda and Amelia Hacker became well known locally for their distinctive dress and public habits. They were provided with identical silk dresses, lace shawls, colorful sashes, and oversized buckles, attire reflecting both prosperity and attention to style. Their coordinated appearance became a familiar sight in Canterbury, and residents often referred to them as the Canterbury Bells, a nickname that was used affectionately as well as mockingly. The sisters frequently walked arm in arm along the promenades of Margate and Ramsgate, 2 popular seaside resorts in Kent. These resorts attracted visitors seeking leisure, fresh sea air, and public entertainment. Improved transportation, including early rail connections and coach travel, made the seaside more accessible to middle-class residents of Canterbury. Matilda and Amelia's public walks offered a visible performance of their style, presence, and social standing. The sisters' visibility was a notable aspect of their lives. Their coordinated dress and promenades created a local reputation, situating them as recognizable figures rather than private or reclusive women. They were observed by local residents and visitors alike, and their public persona was reinforced through commentary in local newspapers and conversation. This period of visibility contrasts sharply with Matilda's later life of isolation and evasive behavior. Her early prominence provides context for understanding the public attention that followed her disappearance in Houston Square decades later. The nickname Canterbury Bells became a symbol of both the sisters' aesthetic choices and their social presence, illustrating how Victorian society noted distinctive female behavior. Matilda's earlier life as a recognizable and stylish figure underscores the dramatic shift in her circumstances in the years before her mysterious disappearance and the subsequent murder investigation. The deaths of Matilda Hacker's father and sister marked a turning point in her life. Following John Hacker's passing, Matilda inherited property income, which allowed her to maintain financial independence. She began to refuse payment of local rates and municipal levies, prompting ongoing disputes with Canterbury authorities. Her defiance reflected both her ability to support herself and a willingness to resist civic obligations. After Amelia's death, Matilda assumed full control of the property income. She continued to evade payment of taxes and other civic duties, reinforcing her growing independence from local authorities. Matilda also increasingly adopted false names and conducted her affairs in ways that minimized direct oversight. Rental income from her properties provided a steady means to sustain her lifestyle and facilitated a pattern of evasive behavior. In 1875, Matilda actively resisted the installation of mains water in her residences. She submitted a formal letter to the local government board, arguing that river water was sufficient for her needs and that the cost of the new system was unaffordable. Authorities responded by explaining the public health rationale for the water supply, emphasizing community sanitation and safety. Matilda's refusal to comply exemplified her willingness to challenge official directives while maintaining her own financial independence. These developments illustrate a trajectory of increasing conflict and isolation. Matilda's defiance was not merely financial, but extended to interactions with civic institutions, creating a reputation for eccentricity and resistance. Her actions remained lawful in the narrow sense, but placed her at odds with Canterbury's authorities. This period established a context of social and legal tension that would define her later life, ultimately leading to her imprisonment and flight from the city as unresolved disputes over civic compliance escalated. Matilda Hacker's continued refusal to pay water rates resulted in legal consequences. Authorities attempted to recover the owed funds through a distress warrant, which proved unsuccessful. She was subsequently arrested and sentenced to 2 months in Westgate Prison. During the process, some of her jewelry was seized to settle outstanding debts, including items that had once formed part of her public and flamboyant wardrobe. Following her release, Matilda chose to leave Canterbury entirely. She adopted assumed names to avoid detection and relocated first to Brighton, seeking anonymity and distance from public attention. Later, she moved to London, continuing to live under an alias. By 1877, she was residing as Miss Hewish at 4 Houston Square, a lodging house owned by Severin Bastendorf. This relocation marked a dramatic contrast from her earlier public life. Once a visible figure in Canterbury and at seaside resorts, Matilda now lived with reduced visibility, relying on discretion and assumed identities to navigate urban life. Her independence was maintained through rental income and careful avoidance of official scrutiny. Despite her diminished public presence, Matilda remained financially secure and self-sufficient. The transition to London provided both physical and social distance from the disputes that had arisen in Canterbury. Her life as Miss Hewish was largely private, yet it set the stage for the circumstances leading to her disappearance in Houston Square, which would later result in public attention, investigation, and unresolved questions surrounding her death. The final confirmed sighting of Matilda Hacker occurred on Sunday, 14th October, 1877. On that day, maid Hannah Dobs was sent to collect rent from Matilda and returned with a £5 note requiring change. Bastendorf, the lodging house owner, was absent for part of the day. Hannah reported that Miss Hacker had left the premises suddenly and would not return. At the time, this departure raised no immediate alarm. Residents of lodging houses were accustomed to tenants moving under assumed names or relocating for personal reasons. Matilda's previous behavior, including her evasive management of property and frequent moves, contributed to the perception that her leaving was deliberate rather than suspicious. Following her departure, no one heard from Matilda again. Her disappearance remained unexplained, and the lack of communication reinforced the assumption that she had chosen to vanish. Authorities had no immediate evidence of foul play, and the case initially attracted only modest attention, consistent with her established pattern of independence and movement. The absence of any subsequent sightings marked the beginning of a prolonged period of uncertainty regarding her fate. Matilda Hacker's disappearance from Houston Square represented a sharp contrast with her earlier life as a public figure, underscoring both the deliberate nature of her movement and her ability to evade detection. This period established the background for later developments, including the discovery of a body in Houston Square, which would ultimately prompt intense investigation and media coverage. Matilda's deliberate disappearance, initially interpreted as ordinary behavior for an independent woman of means, set the stage for what became known as the Houston Square mystery, drawing public interest and historical attention decades later. On the 9th May 1879, a 15-year-old boy named William Stronum was cleaning the coal cellar at Houston Square when he made a shocking discovery. He found the decomposing remains of a female body, positioned on the floor of the cellar. A rope was observed around the neck, and the limbs were partially missing, creating an immediate impression of foul play. Stronum's reaction was one of alarm, and he immediately summoned the authorities. Police arrived promptly, followed by Dr. Davis, who assessed the condition of the remains. The body was found partially wrapped in oilcloth and bound with cord, suggesting deliberate concealment. Medical examination indicated that the cause of death involved a significant blow to the neck, though the precise role of the cord remained uncertain. Identification was complicated by decomposition, requiring attention to clothing and personal items. Among the recovered items were a silk shawl and a brooch, both recognizable from Matilda Hacker's known attire. The press quickly reported the discovery, dubbing the case the Houston Square mystery. Public attention focused on the combination of her prior disappearance and the unusual condition of the body. Establishing the time of death proved difficult, with investigators relying on witness testimony, property records, and condition of the remains. Authorities documented the scene thoroughly, noting the concealment methods, the oilcloth wrapping, and the use of cord, all of which suggested deliberate effort to hide the body. The recovered clothing, combined with other personal effects, provided crucial leads for identification. These initial findings laid the foundation for a prolonged and complex investigation, raising questions about identity, motive, and opportunity. The discovery of the body represented a turning point in the case. The public, authorities, and press all became aware of a confirmed death linked to Matilda Hacker, transforming her prior disappearance into a formal murder inquiry. The unusual circumstances and physical evidence immediately suggested criminal intent, initiating a detailed process of identification and investigation. Efforts to identify the body discovered at Houston Square proved initially unsuccessful. Investigators reviewed lodging house records, tenant histories, and local registries, but the information provided no immediate match. Dentists and other specialists were consulted, yet early attempts at identification failed. The breakthrough came when dental casts allowed for comparison with Matilda Hacker's known dental records. Confirmation of identity was further supported by clothing recognition. Edward Hacker, Matilda's brother, identified garments belonging to her, including the silk shawl and brooch recovered from the coal cellar. Additionally, a gold watch previously owned by Matilda was traced to a pawn shop, corroborating her presence in London under an assumed name. These findings conclusively established that the remains were those of Matilda Hacker. Hannah Dobs, the lodging house maid, was identified as the last person to see Matilda alive. Investigators scrutinized her past, her relationships, and her access to Matilda's belongings. Evidence indicated that she had pawned the gold watch and had knowledge of items now recovered from the scene. Authorities took note of her behavior, movements, and prior interactions with Matilda, establishing a foundation for potential charges. Following the identification, Hannah Dobs was arrested and charged with murder. The emerging suspicions centered on her opportunity access to Matilda's personal effects, and her presence in Houston Square at the time of the disappearance. Investigators compiled testimony, property records, and witness statements to build a circumstantial case. The identification of the body transformed the case from a missing person inquiry to a formal criminal investigation. The convergence of dental evidence, clothing, and witness testimony pointed to Matilda Hacker's confirmed death. Public interest intensified, and legal proceedings were prepared, setting the stage for the trial of Hannah Dobs and a broader examination of 19th-century investigative practices. Hannah Dobs's trial commenced in July 1879 at the Old Bailey in London. The prosecution presented a circumstantial case, highlighting Dobs's possession of Matilda Hacker's property, the pawned gold watch, and her opportunity to commit the crime. Witness testimony included statements regarding her movements and behavior at Houston Square prior to and following the disappearance. The defense challenged the cause of death, suggesting alternative explanations and emphasizing the absence of direct evidence linking Dobs to the fatal blow. They also questioned the reliability of witnesses and pointed to inconsistencies in the identification of personal property. Arguments focused on reasonable doubt and the limitations of forensic methods in the late 19th century. Several witnesses provided crucial testimony. Edward Hacker, Matilda's brother, confirmed recognition of the silk shawl and other garments. Hannah Dobs's actions in pawning the gold watch were examined, alongside statements she allegedly made concerning her employer. The jury also heard evidence regarding the condition of the body and the cord found at the scene. The judge instructed the jury on legal standards, emphasizing the need to evaluate cause of death, access, and possession of property. They were asked to consider three key questions regarding identification, opportunity, and motive. Following deliberation, the jury returned a not guilty verdict. Hannah Dobs displayed relief and composure, having avoided conviction for Matilda Hacker's death. The outcome left the murder officially unsolved. While Dobs's alleged involvement remained a matter of public speculation, legal authorities were unable to secure a conviction. The trial highlighted the challenges of 19th-century forensic investigation, the limitations of circumstantial evidence, and the role of public interest in shaping perceptions of criminal cases. Following the trial, public attention remained focused on the Houston Square murder, and the case continued to spark debate within Canterbury. Hannah Dobs publicly accused Severin Bastendorf, the lodging house owner, of involvement in Matilda Hacker's disappearance and death. Dobs claimed that Bastendorf had acted suspiciously and suggested that he might have had motives linked to financial gain or concealment of wrongdoing. Bastendorf denied all allegations, maintaining that he had no knowledge of the circumstances surrounding the death. Authorities investigated Dobs's claims, and Bastendorf was briefly arrested and charged with perjury for providing false statements during the inquiry. Court proceedings confirmed some inconsistencies in his testimony, and he was ultimately convicted of perjury, receiving a formal sentence. Despite this, no one was ever convicted of the murder itself. The actual perpetrator of Matilda Hacker's death remained unknown, leaving the case officially unresolved and continuing to attract public speculation. In the years following the events, Houston Square underwent changes, with part of the area being renamed Ensley Gardens. The case continued to influence local memory, newspapers, and historical accounts as an example of unresolved crime in 19th-century Canterbury. Matilda Hacker's life, from her early years as a prosperous stonemason's daughter to her later eccentricity and sudden death, became a source of fascination and cautionary reflection. Her disappearance, subsequent discovery, and the failed prosecution highlighted both the limitations of contemporary investigation and the societal interest in sensational cases. The story of Matilda Hacker remains a notable historical mystery, illustrating the challenges of legal and forensic processes in the Victorian era. Her life and death, though tragic and unresolved, continue to captivate historians, true crime enthusiasts, and those interested in the social history of Canterbury.